Here are the top 14 reasons why you should be buying silver. Number 14. Infinite money in a finite world. The irresistible force paradox asks, what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? Our debt-based monetary system must create more debt each and every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. The more debt money the bankers create, the more profit they have. The more money, debt, the politicians spend, the more power they have. This sick symbiotic relationship of lender of last resort meets the spender of last resort ensures exponential growth of money. The elite will keep using the power of the printing press to maintain their power, but ultimately this will only accelerate their demise. There is a mathematical inevitable end to this system, as infinite money debt meets the world's finite resources and ultimately the limits of human faith. The more money and debt chasing after fewer goods and services will cause inflation. Ultimately, people's faith in currency will fail worldwide. It will become evident that the elite intend to print the currency into oblivion, ruining the main function of money as a store of value. When this happens, people will throw their depreciating currency at any tangible asset they can get their hands on. Precious metals will be the main beneficiary of this. The frightening thing is that it's not just American citizens that will be affected by this global destruction of paper currency, because this will be the first time in human history in which the entire world has become interconnected and dependent upon this fiat monetary illusion. Stop thinking about another American Great Depression and start thinking about the Dark Ages. My suggestion would be to beat the rush and panic now. When this current monetary order dies, so will millions if not billions of people as an era of unlimited money comes to an end. Think of the millions that are on food stamps that have no support system to carry them. Think about the billions of dollars in food subsidies ending, food riots, skyrocketing food and fuel prices globally. In this hyperinflationary collapse of the world's money, I predict that up to 90% of your money will go towards food and fuel. Not your mortgage, not your car payments, taxes, tuitions, medical bills, or anything else. Just the basic necessities like food and fuel. Most will not be able to make this transition and unfortunately will die. And that is before the wars, riots, and violence take even more people down. This dramatic shift in life will also prevent people from having children in this turbulence. There will be a scar in the human experience that will be felt for generations. Number 13, the shift from paper assets to tangible assets. Those that understand that there is a major shift out of paper assets into real assets inevitably start with the gut reaction of buying gold. The more I learned about silver, the more I saw that it was the only investment for me and my family. I am more bullish now in 2012 than I was when I bet the house on silver in 2005. When you truly understand the fundamentals behind silver, you will see that it's simply the best investment out there. And I challenge anyone to find me a better investment. First and foremost, the reason why I invested in physical silver is because it is a physical, tangible asset. When I say invest in silver, I do not mean anything else but the real stuff in your hand. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Stay away from SLV, unallocated bullion accounts, mining shares, and stick to the physical. I would hate for you to be right on silver and wrong on the form of silver. We are entering a generational shift out of paper assets into real tangible assets. As I've stated many times in the past, the dollar is mathematically going to collapse, and it is the very basis for our entire world economy. The dollar collapse will be the single largest event in human history, and will dramatically touch every human being on Earth and will leave a scar on generations to come. Yes, it's going to be that big. When the mathematically inevitable collapse happens, all paper assets will be destroyed. This goes for dollars, yen, euro, CDs, munis, T-bills, money markets, insurance policies, pensions, privately owned businesses, structured settlements, social security, dividends, 401ks, IRAs, stocks, options, bonds, and even real estate. Without a functioning currency and the uncertainty it brings, credit grinds to a halt, payments grind to a halt, markets grind to a halt, the world economy grinds to a halt. People panic, and this always leads to war. This naturally leads to investors finding value in real tangible assets like commodities. Commodities are real things that we use every day in our life, like pork, cotton, corn, oil, and steel. The problems with most commodities is storage. I know for a fact that two of the best asset classes to be in terms of real inflation-adjusted returns, will be food and fuel. They are most essential to humanity, and they are hardest to live without. I strongly recommend people stocking up on preparations before they buy silver. You will need at least a 3-month supply of food per person as a buffer for the massive global social upheaval we are going to go through with the collapse of the dollar. The problem with investing in most food and fuel is storage issues. Most food and fuel deteriorates and becomes worthless. Also, storage can be prohibitive because we're talking about some big dollars. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't have a grain silo or storage tanks. Unless you're a farmer or an oil baron, this usually rules out many commodities for the average investor. This brings us to metals because they don't deteriorate. For most metals, storage is a big issue. $8,000 will buy you a ton of copper, but just over 4 ounces of gold. This is why precious metals are sought after, because of their rarity and their ability to store so much wealth in a small space. Number 12. Silver is the indispensable metal. The first demand is industrial demand. First and foremost, silver is being used as an industrial metal. Silver is the indispensable metal. Next to oil, silver is the most widely used commodity ever, as it has over 10,000 uses. As technology progresses and expands, silver's usefulness will explode even further. Its unique characteristics are unlike any other commodity in the world. It is the most reflective of all metals, the greatest conductor of both heat and electricity, strongly resists corrosion and oxidation, second most malleable and ductile metal next to gold, and it has recently been discovered to be a very effective antimicrobial and bacterial metal, and is now even being used in the war against cancer. Silver is generally used in small quantities, and its unique characteristics make it irreplaceable. This demand is growing and inelastic to price, which provides a very strong base for the next demand to put some more fuel on the fire. Number 11. Investment demand is growing. The next demand is the growing investment demand. This demand has almost been dead for the past generation of investors. This demand has a Jekyll and Hyde component to it. It has a paper trader component to it that simply wants a horse to bet on. These investors are primarily Anglo-American institutional investors and tend to want the silver price lower. But what they really want is to get big swings in the market. They trade anywhere from 40 to 1,000 paper ounces of silver for every real physical ounce in the market, and they only usually take about 3% of the real physical off the market when it is traded. This institutional demand is still in its early stages and seems content in the paper chase of the trader market. This institutional demand is set to grow not only in acceptance, but in worldwide audience and finally in physical metal. Institutions seem to follow the leader, and when it becomes apparent that silver is up 20% a year while the stock market is flat, it won't take long for these sharks to smell blood in the water, and they'll want more exposure to silver and other commodities. At first they'll play the paper market, but soon they will want the real thing. Foreign institutional investment demand is quite different than our institutional investment demand. They don't seem interested in playing the paper chase, and they want real physical silver. They seem intent on dumping dollars for real assets. The opening of the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange is a good example of this. During the last bull run of silver in the 80s, only Western nations participated in that market. Since then, there is 10 to 20 times more capital in the world. There are 50% more people living in the world today, and now all of the world can participate in this silver bull run. China, India, and Russia are leading the charge to buy more and more precious metals. There are a lot of potentially useless dollars floating around the world, and they want real tangible assets in return. This type of foreign institutional investment demand wants higher prices and has the potential for backing the final demand, which will catapult silver into the stratosphere. The final investment demand is private investors. These investors typically want physical and only dabble in the paper trader market. These investors buy and hold, and they differentiate themselves from the other demands that specifically want a higher price for their investment. They plan on dumping their toxic paper assets and getting real physical assets outside of the paper chase. These investors are like ants, constantly taking food off the table and storing it for a rainy day. This demand is joining the industrial demand and taking real physical metal off of the market. But unlike the industrial users, the investment demand of private investors strictly want higher prices. Number 10. Monetary demand is insatiable. The final and completely absent demand in this world is monetary demand. Silver has absolutely no monetary demand in the world. It is used in things and invested for protection against inflation, but nowhere in the world can you just buy things with it. I believe that with the mathematically inevitable collapse of the worldwide currencies, this new monetary demand will push silver through the sky. Some countries or local communities will monetize silver, and as history has shown, money goes to where it's most appreciated. All of humanity will be crying out for real money as they try to recover from the fiat something-for-nothing dream. How will quadrillions of fiat paper money flow into less than 1 billion ounces of silver? It's impossible. Paper is poverty. It is the ghost of money and not money itself. Thomas Jefferson. I have seen bright and intelligent men fail to understand that the electronic digits in their computer screens are not real money. They always do get it when you hold an ounce of gold or a 100-ounce bar of silver. It's a frightening aspect of our society that we've become so detached from real money that most of us cannot even comprehend real money. Do yourself a favor this week and go to your local coin shop and just touch an ounce of gold or a big fat shiny bar of silver. Then look at that wad of paper in your wallet, or worse, the digits in your bank account, and tell me honestly, where would you rather invest your future? This third and final demand of monetary demand is insatiable, as no one can ever have too much money. Number 9. Silver's price is inelastic. This is what makes its price inelastic. All commodities have a self-correcting price mechanism except for silver. If a commodity's price rises too high, demand drops off as people seek substitutes or supply rises to meet the demand, thus lowering the price. This mechanism does not exist for silver. Silver is typically used in very small quantities and high-tech components, and there is no substitute for it. So a manufacturer or customer will have to absorb any price increase. Silver is now starting to be used in clothing to reduce odors caused by bacteria. What is remarkable about it is that by weight, silver represents only 1/40,000th of the total of inputs on that shirt. When used in such tiny quantities, silver's price is almost irrelevant. Over 20 million tons of polyester sportswear produced every year. The textile industry consumes 1,200 tons of silver annually. That's 38 million ounces. Let's say, for example, the average computer contains 1/10 of an ounce of silver. That would mean that there is about $3 of silver in the computer. Now let's assume the computer in question costs $1,500. If silver were to go to $1,000 an ounce, the same silver in that computer would be $100. Do you think Apple Computer is going to throw its arms up in the air and cry that they can no longer sell computers because silver is too expensive? No, they will raise the price of the computer and probably advertise that it has the most silver in it. Do you think the average consumer is going to say, I would buy a computer at $1,500, but at $1,600, no way? No, they'll find a way to get the extra $100 so they can read the latest online news about Miley Cyrus. It's not just consumer products that are at risk. It's the companies, the industries, the nations that are at risk. Apple has a market cap of $400 billion. If a strategic commodity like silver starts having shortages, their billion-dollar empire is endangered. Companies will go into panic buying, securing any amount of physical silver they can because their entire value-added business is dependent upon it. They will not be buying SLV or certificates of deposits. Only the real physical silver will suffice. They will whip out their huge checkbook and stock up. Now you can see why rising prices actually increase demand. And it's not just the computer industry that's relying upon silver. It's the multi-billion-dollar industries like energy, medical, and the military. And soon the banking industry, as their debt money system collapse. This directly affects national destinies. Number 8, the value of total energy inputs.
Why is gold worth some $20 an ounce?
I don't know, because it's scarce.
1,000 men say go searching for gold. After 6 months, one of them's lucky. 1 out of the 1,000. His find represents not only his own labor, but that of 999 others to boot. That's 6,000 months or 500 years, scrabbling over mountains, going hungry and thirsty. An ounce of gold, mister, is worth what it is because of the human labor that went into the finding and the getting of it.
Now think about how much energy, labor, ingenuity, and time that goes into finding that silver and refining it.
The mining company produces silver bars, the composition of which is 93 to 97% pure silver. It sells the bars to a refinery, which further purifies them for sale to industries. The action begins down in the mine, where geologists point a night-on gun at various spots in the rock face. The device detects the levels of 40 different elements, including silver. Silver in its natural state isn't silver-colored at all. It's charcoal gray. Those silver-looking deposits are actually zinc and lead. Miners drill holes in the silver-rich areas the geologists pinpointed, then insert sticks of dynamite. After the blast, carts haul the chunks of rock, called ore, to the surface. Geologists then test ore piles and blend them as required to achieve a consistent amount of silver content per kilogram of ore. The ore first goes into the primary crusher. The machine's huge steel teeth break up the big chunks into smaller pieces. Those pieces then drop through grates below into the secondary crusher, which breaks them down into even smaller pieces. Those go into vibrating cone crushers, which pulverize them into tiny pieces. A conveyor transports the crushed ore to the ball mill. At this point, the ore pieces are roughly 6 millimeters big. As the mill's large cylinder rotates, steel balls bounce around inside, grinding the ore into powder. A water circulation system flushes the silver-rich powder out of the cylinder and into large tanks which keep the water moving. To separate and dissolve the metals the powder contains, workers pour in acid. 72 hours later, the rock waste now settled at the bottom, the solution containing dissolved silver is pumped through filter presses. The filter plates are treated with a zinc-based chemical which attracts silver molecules. As the solution passes through, the plates trap particles containing silver, forming a layer of black powder called silver precipitate. This precipitate is composed of approximately 50% silver and 50% waste, the waste being a jumble of various metals, dirt, and other impurities. To separate the silver from the waste, they first dry the precipitate in a gas furnace for a couple of hours. In the mining company's lab, technicians continuously test ore samples to determine the grade, the term for the quantity of silver per kilogram of ore. They heat the samples to 1093 degrees Celsius for about an hour to burn off the impurities. What's left after the burn-off are the silver and other metals, such as lead, zinc, copper, selenium, and cadmium. Lab technicians then treat the samples with a chemical that prevents silver from burning off and put them back in the oven. When the samples come out about an hour later, all the other metals have burnt off and only silver is left. They weigh the silver and compare it to the weight of the original sample in order to calculate the grade. The key to running a profitable mine is to ensure that the grade is consistently within certain parameters. Back at the mill, workers put the now dried silver precipitate into an oven, along with chemicals which prevent silver from burning off. Approximately 4 hours later, the silver and waste have separated and melted. Workers pour them into bar-shaped molds. The silver, being heavier, settles at the bottom. Workers skim off the waste floating on top. In less than 5 minutes, the molten silver cools and hardens, enabling workers to extract what is now a silver bar. The mining company sells the bars to a refinery for processing into industrial-grade silver.
It's crazy to think that all those tons of earth were moved just to find 1 ounce of silver, and right now we can buy it all for less than a dinner for 4 at our local sports bar. Number 7. Silver has no counterparty risk. Silver has another awesome quality. It has a alloidial title to it. If you hold it, you own it. Almost every asset you own is controlled by somebody else. If you own your house outright, you still have to pay property tax, which means you really don't own it. Your cars, computers, TVs, and clothes are rendered less valuable with each registration, taxation, new fashion, or planned obsolescence. Even your stocks are not really yours because the actual certificates are being held by the nefarious DTCC. Who knows if they're selling stock that maybe they don't have? Have you ever heard of naked short selling? Silver is without counterparty risk. You do not have to rely upon somebody else fulfilling a promise for your asset to have value. All paper assets have counterparty risk. They use interest rates to value the risk that you might not get your money back. This will become very important as our society collapses and promises are broken by all. When the collapse accelerates, people will do the unspeakable thing as they become more and more desperate. People whom you have relied upon for years will suddenly break faith. This will not only happen on an individual level, but also on a corporate and governmental level. Pensions will be cut, benefits terminated, interest payments not paid. And this is where things get really scary. At this point, we will either see a deflationary crash or hyperinflationary depression. It will be a deflationary crash if there's not enough money to pay the increasing debt and interest. But I believe the elite will pay all the obligations to keep their game going.
Do you still believe that we should maintain the fundamental principles of Social Security as you did in 83?
I think we should maintain the principles of Social Security, but I think the existing structure is not working, and that until we can construct a system which creates the savings that are required to build the real assets so that the retirees have real goods and services, we don't have a system that's working. We have one that basically moves cash around, and we can guarantee cash benefits as far out and at whatever size you like, but we cannot guarantee their purchasing power. And this is why the issue ultimately has got to be resolved in terms of, do we have the material goods and services that people will need to consume, not whether or not we pass some hurdle with respect to how legal financing occurs, because the financing is a secondary issue, and it's the means to create the real wealth, not an end in itself.
This will get every promise paid with toilet paper currency. Number 6. Silver is below the inflation-adjusted high. We all know that $50 in 2012 does not buy you anywhere near what it did in 1980. If we factor that record 1980 price of $50 in silver using the government's rigged inflation numbers, that means we would have a real inflation-adjusted high of silver at $130. That would mean that we're still 75% below the real inflation-adjusted high of silver back in 1980. If we use that same inflation calculator for gold, we would see the real high for gold is $2,300. This means that we're still 25% below that record in real terms. I believe the real high of silver and gold is much, much higher than that for many reasons. First, the government is lying to you about the real rate of inflation. A recent CNBC article shows that the government is lying to you even today about the real rate of inflation. They do this so they can steal from you, plain and simple. Every dollar that they print is a direct tax against your wages and savings. They need to keep your expectations low so that you will not panic while they are gutting you. The government hides this inflation of the currency through 4 major tricks. Number 1 is hedonic adjustments. If a car goes up in price, say from $20,000 to $21,000, it would, on the face of it, show a 5% increase in the price. The government does not want that, so it creates an adjustment which takes into account the value of the options added. They arbitrarily create a dollar figure of value of, say, a better standard radio, better tires, lumbar support, upgraded cloth seats, and a dual exhaust. The government can say that that added $1,500 worth of value to that car. So in calculating for inflation, the price of the car went down 2.5% to $19,500. It does not matter if you don't want, need, or even value those options. The price goes up for you and down for the government. A trick corporations use is to say a 12-ounce can of soda is $1, and through smaller cans they are now 10 ounces and still charge you $1. You lose 17% of your soda, which costs more per ounce. The government says it's still a can of soda and it's the same price, so no inflation. Presto. The second trick they use is substitution. If inflation cannot be tamed through hedonics, they simply substitute a product in the basket with a less expensive product. Say the original basket of goods had filet mignon in it, and it went up from $9 to $10 a pound. They can simply substitute it with porterhouse steak at, say, $6 a pound, and actually say that inflation went down to eat meat. They can then substitute that with ground beef, chicken, pork, or even dog food. The very fact that people would substitute a higher product for a lesser one because of cost is clear evidence of inflation, and yet they use it to understate it. If housing remains too expensive, they use rental rates. Remember, it's all about containing your expectations. The third trick they use is weighting. When that does not work, the government changes the weighting of a hotter category with a lesser one. For example, healthcare and education are notorious for rising costs. They make up 20% of the economy, and for the CPI, the government might only weigh it as 15%, lessening the effect of the overall number. Or they might weigh certain regions of the country more than others. Or they might weigh discretionary consumables that are known to be falling in price, that we buy infrequently, and that are not vital to the necessities that we need and buy every day. The fourth trick is, when all else fails, they just don't count it at all. Left out of all these real inflation equations for the government are the most essential parts of our lives. food, energy, and taxes. I don't know about you, but these three things are the things that I care about most in my budget. In addition to these internal tools, the government can export inflation by sending money overseas so it never hits our economy. Also, if money can be pushed into stocks, it does not enter the real economy, and that also benefits the elite, especially when there is an orchestrated fleecing of the public through crashes. So there were the four tricks that the government uses to lower our expectations on inflation. They use hedonic adjustments, substitution, weighting, and subtraction. This allows the government to post benign inflation of 2.4% when the real rate is easily over 10%. So if the real rate of inflation is 4 times higher than the official CPI number of silver and gold, that would put the real high of silver at $528 and gold at $9,220. This is a much more realistic number because the money supply in the United States has been vastly increased since 1980. Using the broad component of M2, there is approximately 10 times the amount of money in the economy. So if silver was at close to $50 in 1980 times, 10 times more dollars in circulation would mean that silver is close to $500, and gold should be close to $8,500. With those numbers in mind, we are still miles away of hitting any real record in gold and silver. And this is just one factor in the price of silver. When you realize that there is a lot less silver in the world since 1980, $500 is too low. When you realize that there are 50% more people in the world since 1980, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that only about 15% of the world's population even had the opportunity to participate in the bull run of the 70s and 80s, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that there are a lot more dollars, euros, yen, yuan, and other currencies of the world since 1980, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that we are going to have a mathematically inevitable collapse of all fiat currencies, all paper assets like stocks, bonds, and real estate, silver is actually priceless. Number 5. Silver's history as money. Throughout history, silver has been used as money in more times and more places than gold. To function as money, a monetary item should possess a number of features. It needs to be a medium of exchange. It should have the liquidity and be easily tradable. It should be easily transportable. Precious metals have a high value to weight ratio, and it should be durable. To be a unit of account, it should be divisible into small units without destroying its value. Precious metals can be coined from bars or melted down into bars again with a low percentage cost. It should be fungible, that is, one unit or one piece is equivalent to another unit, which is why diamonds and works of art and real estate are not suitable as money. It must have a specific weight or measure or size to be certifiably accountable. The third feature is that it needs to be a store of value. It should be long-lasting, durable, and it must not be perishable or subject to decay. It should have a stable value. It should be difficult to counterfeit, and the genuine must be easily recognizable. Today's silver is not used as money since it does not circulate, but it still provides a crucial role as a store of value. Number 4. Silver is better than gold. Why should I choose silver and not gold? 95% of the gold that's ever been mined is still in existence in some form or another because it has been treasured. And yet 95%, if not more, of the silver that has ever been mined has been destroyed or used in such small quantities, for all practical purposes, it's gone forever. The elite and their central banks own tons of gold and no silver. Silver is cheaper than gold. The average American can buy 1 ounce of silver without much thought. But if he wants to even buy 1 ounce of gold, he would probably have to talk to his spouse about it. This means that when the chickens come home to roost, people will be able to afford silver on the way up than they will be able to afford gold. Gold has very few uses compared to silver. Gold mines are common, but silver is mined mainly as a byproduct of other minerals and metals like zinc. The Gold Antitrust Action Committee has led the charge for years in exposing bankers' manipulation of gold. Their investigations and awareness campaigns have led to a heightened awareness of gold in the investment community. GATA is headed by Chris Powell and Bill Murphy. This group spent $265,000 to get a full-page article in the Wall Street Journal asking, "Where is our gold?" This brave action asked the investment community why our gold reserves have not been audited in 50 years and how much gold we really have. I judge men not by the answers they give, but by the questions they ask. This question was a direct assault in the heart of the beast. GATA found out that awareness campaigns are nice, but they do not change the game. And I remember a year or so after that, GATA actually came out and supported the idea to actually sell gold and buy silver, because the battle against the bankers is easier to win in the silver market. No central banks have silver to sell like they do gold. The market for silver is so small compared to gold that very little money would be needed to have the bankers capitulate in their duplicitous acts. When the Gold Antitrust Action Committee says to sell gold and buy silver, you have to pay attention. The COMEX registered silver inventory now stands at 35 million ounces. A little over $1 billion would completely empty the largest stockpile of silver. To put that number into perspective, last Friday the United States government increased our federal debt by $120 billion. That $1 billion of registered COMEX silver would represent 12 minutes of increased federal deficit spending. If you see that quadrillions in paper assets are going to fail, and that most commodities are not suitable for investment, and how small the silver market is, it does not take a very large stretch of the imagination to think what will happen when people try to get into this market. Number 3. Silver to become extinct? Silver has been used as an industrial metal for the past 100 years and has not been cherished for what it really is, a precious metal. Industrial metals like aluminum, copper, and iron are plentiful and can be used in huge quantities and disposed of or recycled. Unlike most industrial metals, silver is used in such small quantities in proportion to the finished product that it's not recycled except in photography.
My socks have nano silver on them too, and they kill the bacteria that ew.
Silver literally has been thrown away into toxic trash piles all over the world and thus has disappeared. In fact, here's a chart showing for the past 64 years the world has consumed more silver than it's produced. Since the dawn of man, gold has been treasured. In more recent times, silver has been trashed as an industrial commodity and not valued as a precious metal. With the rise of technology, silver has literally been thrown away in such small quantities that it may never be recovered. In fact, the United States Geological Survey said that if current trends continue, silver will be the first element to become extinct on the periodic table. Governments held approximately 10 billion ounces of silver in 1950 and have been supplying that physical stock steadily into the open market for years. Today, there is no more surplus left to sell. The nations that manage their resources the best will win the future. Number 2, the gold to silver ratio. Gold is 10 times more rare than silver when mined out of the earth. The fact that gold has been treasured and silver has been trashed makes the silver that is left much more rare than the 10-to-1 ratio that it naturally occurs in. The gold to silver ratio is 1 to 50. It takes approximately 50 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. If throughout all of history, for every 1 ounce of gold that has been mined, 10 ounces of silver have come out of the ground, how much longer can we expect to have a 1 to 50 ratio? If silver has been trashed for decades and gold has been treasured, how much longer can we have a 1 to 50 gold to silver ratio? If the amount of dollars invested in gold and silver at Sprott Asset Management, Gold Money, and the U.S. Mint is 1 to 1, how much longer can we have a 1 to 50 gold to silver ratio? At some point, the market's going to recognize the incredible opportunity. And when it does, it will most likely overshoot and make silver actually more valuable than gold. So, if you really want to buy gold, buy silver. You can buy 50 ounces of silver right now, and if the ratio falls to a 1-to-1 ratio, you can trade those 50 ounces of silver for 50 ounces of gold. And the number one reason why you should be buying silver, the dime-a-day ratio. During the height of the Roman Empire, the average day's pay for the average soldier or worker was the silver denarius. The denarius was 1/10 of an ounce of silver and very similar to our silver dimes of yesteryear. What I find amazing is the implied value of this coin into our modern lives. This dime of the Roman Empire was the average day's pay for the average worker. It paid for all the living expenses of a man and his family, food, shelter, clothes, taxes, and maybe a little fun from time to time. How would we begin to relate the value of that silver dime to where we are today? First, think about the kind of work a Roman soldier or a field worker would have to go through to get that denarius. Most likely, that Roman soldier would be enduring terrible conditions or fighting hand-to-hand combat. The average worker would be working 12 hours a day, using rudimentary tools, doing arduous tasks to eke out an existence. The average American soldier or laborer probably makes the minimum wage of about $8 an hour. If we multiplied $8 times 12 hours the Roman laborers and soldiers would have had to work, that would make the implied value of that silver denarius about $96. If a denarius is 1/10 of an ounce of silver, then the implied value of an ounce of silver is $960. I recently sat down and watched a movie that I had not watched in a long time called Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend that you watch it. The movie starts off with tenant farmers that are slaving away on their landlord's property. They are protesting the raise in rents on their lands. Tom Cruise's dad is killed, and Tom swears revenge upon the landlord. His father's dying wish is that for his son to work his own land one day and be free. Without getting into the whole story about the huge wealth disparity, or lack of freedom, justice, or middle class, Tom and Nicole end up rushing off to America to get free land that America is giving away. The first thing I found interesting was that Nicole's privileged character transferred her wealth from Ireland to the United States in silver spoons. It provided for a lot of value in a very small space. When they arrived in America, they were met with all sorts of problems, including the theft of the silver and a murder. They were plunged into the bowels of society and ended up living in a whorehouse. They finally landed jobs in a chicken factory. There they worked 12 hours a day using steam hoses to take off the feathers of all the chickens. One night, Tom Cruise's character got all fired up and went to the local bar to do prize fighting. He came home drunk, beat up, with $4 in his boot. Then came the one comment that hit me like a rock. Nicole's character said that $4 was more money than she would make in a month at the chicken factory. Factory workers at the turn of the century earned about 10 cents a day, back when the dime was 1/10 of an ounce of silver. This dime for 12 hours of hard human labor is the same dime that Roman soldiers used back when the denarius was 1/10 of an ounce of silver. The $4 that Tom Cruise's character won prize fighting was more money than she would earn in 40 days of continuous hard human labor in that chicken factory. It doesn't stop there. We've all heard that 2/3 of the world today lives off of less than $2 a day. That would be the equivalent of less than 1/10 of an ounce of silver. With the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar, the fiat Ponzi scheme, all paper assets, humans will be forced to revalue everything that they do and desire. The idea that 1/10 of an ounce of silver represented 12 hours of hard human labor during the Roman times, factory workers at the turn of the century, and even 2/3 of the world today is very consistent. The average baby boomer has about $88,000 in retirement. While we all know that $88,000 is not enough to retire in this paper Ponzi scheme, and that you need over $1 million to be able to live comfortably, or at least replace the income that you would be giving up. But with interest rates so low, even that is not enough. For $33,000, one could easily purchase 1,000 ounces of physical silver. If you value that silver not in terms of dollars, how many days of hard human labor that represents, you can start seeing a different way of life. Each ounce of silver represents 10 days of hard human labor throughout all of history and even 2/3 of the world today. 1,000 ounces would represent 10,000 days of consecutive hard human labor, or over 30 years of work. Think about the historical significance of the average person being able to afford 1,000 ounces of silver. I had studied kings of England who did not have 1,000 ounces of silver in their coffers. In fact, for over 800 years, England had to use a tally stick system to act as currency in their country. During the fall of the Roman Empire, barbarians were at the gates of Rome and said that if Rome could pay 1 ton of silver, that the barbarians would go away. The Roman Empire could not or would not come up with a ton of silver to pay off the barbarians, and they were sacked. Today, that same ton of silver would cost just over $1 million. In the United States alone, there are over 11 million millionaires in the United States. Quite feasibly, one of these millionaires could liquidate their paper assets, retirement funds, stocks, bonds, and real estate, and easily afford 1 ton of silver, that which the Roman Empire could not or would not provide during its time of need. For about the cost of a new car, the average person can go out and buy 1,000 ounces of silver. The historical significance of that purchase is truly amazing. Even if you can't afford to buy 1,000 ounces of silver, think of all the silver that you buy in terms of days' labor. Can you buy 100 ounces of silver? That would represent 1,000 days of hard human labor throughout all of history and 2/3 of the world today. Even if you can only afford to buy 10 ounces of silver, that's 100 days of hard human labor when this paper paradigm collapses. Think about the buffer that could provide you and your family. The best estimates of the amount of silver that I see available are that there are 1 billion ounces of physical silver available. There are 7 billion people in the world. If all that silver was evenly divided amongst all humanity, that would represent about 1/10 of an ounce of silver. But we all know that silver is not dispersed evenly. Silver is being accumulated into stronger and stronger hands, who will not sell this physical silver so long as this paper paradigm exists. For about $2.50, you can go out and buy a mercury dime. Each dime you buy represents one day's buffer of food, shelter, and clothing for you and your family. The choice to me is simple. Forego one coffee or beer while times are good and buy a Mercury dime, or work for 12 hours of hard human labor during desperate times.